Picture this. It is March 2027, and your country holds a presidential election. Millions cast ballots, news anchors call the results. Left wins, or right wins, or the centre holds steady. It doesn't matter which, you already know what happens next because the spreadsheet stays exactly the same. Public spending remains frozen at 57% of your nation's GDP. Deficits persist. Debt climbs toward 120%. This is not cynicism or despair, it is geometry. The system has locked into a shape that no election can reshape. France today is not a leadership problem or a vision problem. It is a structural rigidity problem embedded in law and demographics. And structural problems don't yield to ballots because they run deeper than any political movement. To understand why your vote changes so little, start with three numbers that tell the story of entrapment. 57, 113, 14. France spends 57% of its economic output on public services each year, the highest in the Eurozone except Finland. That figure reflects not choices made today, but commitments made decades ago and embedded in law. The debt stands at 113% of GDP, a figure that has nearly doubled in 30 years, rising from just 58%. What does this mean for your future and your children's? Pensions consume 14% of total spending, the third worst pension burden in Europe, while healthcare adds another 12%. These are not policy choices made by recent governments. These numbers are facts embedded in law, locked into demographics, and committed through decades of political settlement. They form your entry point to understanding why even radical government change shifts almost nothing fundamental. When did your nation commit to this path of rising obligations? France built its social model after World War II, with healthcare for all citizens, pensions that replace real wages, unemployment insurance, and family allowances for workers with children. These were not accidents of policy, but deliberate architecture designed to bind society together and protect its people. For 50 years, they worked magnificently. Wages rose across the economy. Employment was stable. The system remained affordable because the population was younger and working longer. Then what changed? 2 decades of transformation shifted everything fundamentally. Women entered the workforce. Birth rates dropped from 3 children per woman to 1.8, and life expectancy rose by 15 years. By 2000, the mathematics became unforgiving. More people retired. Fewer people worked. The ratio inverted. Yesterday's solution became tomorrow's constraint, and your government entered a trap from which escape became nearly impossible. Here is the core mechanism that locks your government into inaction and limits every future administration. Social spending in France is not discretionary or voluntary, it is automatic. Pensions flow when someone turns 65, without any budget vote or parliamentary approval. Healthcare is automatic. Family benefits are automatic. Over 80% of French public spending is locked into such commitments and obligations that run regardless of economic conditions or current political preference. When someone visits a hospital, the system pays without negotiation. When a retiree reaches their birthday, the pension flows automatically. Your government cannot choose to reduce these commitments without changing the law itself. And changing the law requires political consensus that simply does not exist. Not on the left, not on the right, not among voters themselves. Why? Because the system touches everyone and affects every family. The young see future retirement vanishing. The old see current benefits threatened. Reform becomes impossible, precisely because it is universal and unavoidable. The standard escape hatch for any country burdened by debt is simple and reliable across history. Grow your economy. If your output expands faster than your debt, the debt to GDP ratio shrinks automatically. It worked for Germany in the 2000s. The United States has done it repeatedly. But your nation faces a complication that growth projections cannot overcome or address. Your growth rate has slowed considerably over decades. From 2000 to 2008, France averaged 1.8% annual growth, but from 2010 to 2020, it fell to 1.3%, and today, projections for 2025 sit at just 0.7%. This is not German decline, But it is not escape velocity either. What explains such weak growth? The reason runs deep into your competitiveness and productivity gaps. France suffers from a productivity disadvantage compared to its peers. Labour productivity growth lags behind Germany. ICT adoption remains weak compared to peers. Investment in innovation is lower than in the United States and Germany combined. What does this mean for your deficit path? It means growth cannot save you from painful adjustment. Why does your productivity lag behind European peers and global leaders in innovation? Some analysts blame labour market rigidity. France's hiring laws are strict, firing is expensive, and employers hesitate to expand rapidly. Others blame taxation levels. The tax wedge on labour stands at 47%, one of the highest in the OECD, so workers keep less and companies pay more for the same output and productivity. Still others point to structural shifts in your economy. Your nation has shifted from manufacturing to services, which are inherently less productivity intensive. A haircut cannot become twice as efficient as a factory can. A nurse visit cannot be half the cost of a manufactured good. Yet your firms must export services and goods into a world where Germany manufactures better and the United States innovates faster. The productivity gap persists year after year. Growth stalls. What happens when growth stalls? Your deficit persists. Your government cannot grow its way out of adjustment. The structural problem deepens. Now add one more pressure that tightens the entire trap and accelerates constraints. Interest rates on your government bonds have risen sharply. From 2010 to 2020, France paid historically low rates, near 0%, as central banks stimulated economies. From 2022 onward, rates climbed sharply as central banks raised policy rates to fight inflation. What does this mean practically? In 2024, France spent 2.1% of GDP servicing debt interest. But by 2025, that figure rose to 2.3%, and by 2026, it could reach 2.9%. This is not catastrophic yet, but the acceleration is real and accelerating. Every percentage point of additional interest spending crowds out something else entirely. A euro spent on debt service is a euro not spent on schools or infrastructure investment. How much crowding out? Significant and growing. The interest trap tightens because every percentage point of additional debt requires more interest payments. More interest requires higher taxes or deeper cuts elsewhere. But cuts are politically impossible given what we already know, and your taxes are already among the highest in the OECD. The system tightens. The clearest proof of this lock came in early 2023, when President Macron attempted a modest pension reform that was not radical transformation, but a marginal adjustment to the system. Raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. Extend the work requirement to 43 years. Were these changes radical? No. Germany had already moved to 67. The proposal was a whisper compared to genuine system reform. Yet what happened next shocked observers and revealed the true rigidity. 2 million people marched in the streets. Strikes paralysed transport. Macron faced no confidence votes in Parliament. He was forced to invoke a constitutional override to pass the law without a parliamentary vote, a dramatic invocation of emergency power. Even this marginal change triggered what felt like constitutional crisis. Here is the key insight that politicians understand well. The reform saved far less than you might expect. The actuarial impact was modest. Savings would accumulate slowly over decades. Meanwhile, political damage was immediate and severe. Macron's approval fell significantly. The left and right united in opposition. What is the rational conclusion? Small reforms trigger maximum disruption. Large reforms would trigger upheaval. Any rational politician defers. What about the other escape route your government might pursue to close the gap? Raise taxes substantially. If you cannot cut spending deeply, perhaps you raise revenue. But your nation already taxes income at 55.4% for top earners, among the world's highest rates in developed democracies. The tax-to-GDP ratio is 43.5%, second only to Denmark in the OECD. The tax wedge on labour is 47%, the highest or nearly highest in Europe. How much further can you raise taxes? Very little without economic consequences. Higher income taxes drive emigration. France has lost skilled workers to London, Switzerland, and Singapore for decades in steady outflows. Higher consumption taxes hurt the poor and trigger social unrest. Higher corporate taxes encourage relocation elsewhere. The Netherlands taxes corporations at 19%, Ireland at 12.5%, your country at 25%. Companies already look elsewhere. Another increase would accelerate the exit. Your government is trapped not from lack of will, but from economic geometry. Spending cannot be cut deeply without political uprising. Taxes cannot be raised without economic leakage. The spreadsheet is locked from both sides. Here is a critical distinction that your economists emphasize regularly. Some deficits are cyclical, arising from recessions when tax revenue falls during slowdowns and welfare spending rises automatically. The economy recovers and the deficit shrinks. But your nation's deficit is profoundly different and more intractable. It is not cyclical, it is structural. France ran a 5.8% deficit in 2024, a year of near full employment and economic capacity. When an economy is at full capacity, with jobs abundant, and still runs a 5.8% deficit, what does that mean? That deficit is permanent unless spending falls or taxes rise significantly. The International Monetary Fund estimates your structural deficit at around 4% of GDP, meaning even boom-level growth would leave you with a large structural gap. This is the definition of unsustainable. How long can you borrow at 4% of GDP? Not indefinitely. Eventually, creditors lose confidence, interest rates spike. The cost of servicing debt becomes impossible. Your nation approaches that moment. Look at the debt path your government faces and projects for the coming years. In 2024, France's debt was 113% of GDP, a historically high level. Current projections show it rising to 120% by 2027, then stabilizing only if everything goes well. What if growth disappoints or interest rates rise further? Then it keeps climbing toward crisis territory. For context, how does this compare internationally? Italy is at 140% and has spent 2 decades managing debt pressures. Spain reached 100% during the financial crisis and took a decade to recover. Is France in crisis yet? Not yet, but your nation is on the path toward it. The ratio is moving in the wrong direction. What happens once debt exceeds 120% historically? The dynamics shift fundamentally. You begin paying more in interest each year. Interest crowds out investment. Investment weakens growth. Weaker growth requires higher borrowing. The cycle feeds itself. This is the mechanism of debt traps in action. France has not entered one yet, but every year of inaction moves the decision point closer. From Brussels comes additional pressure that tightens constraints and reduces flexibility further. The European Union's Stability Pact sets a 3% deficit ceiling for all member states without exception. Your nation currently exceeds this by nearly 3 percentage points, creating a gap of roughly 2.8 percentage points. Does this matter? Yes, significantly. In 2024, the EU launched an excessive deficit procedure against France, formal disapproval that comes with recommendations for what your government must accomplish. France is instructed to reach below 3% by 2029, a 5-year timeline. What does that require? Reducing the deficit by nearly 3 percentage points in 5 years means either 3% of GDP in new taxes or 3% of GDP in spending cuts. Is either feasible in that time frame? Not politically viable in France's current political environment. Technically, the EU could impose fines on your nation. Historically, it never has. But the pressure is real and mounting. It comes at a moment when France already struggles to move. Brussels pushes for adjustment. Your society resists. The collision point approaches. What happens when a system cannot adjust and responds to pressures? Your politics become strange and dysfunctional. In 2024, French voters shifted right, electing centre-right leadership with expectations clear. Reform was coming. But early moves towards spending restraint triggered immediate backlash from unions and beneficiaries. Public sector unions protested loudly. The government retreated quickly. Then voters shifted left in subsequent elections, with opposite expectations about protection of benefits. But the numbers did not change. The deficit remained. Growth remained weak. The cycle repeated itself. Is this mismanagement? Not really. It is geometry and arithmetic. A political system cannot impose costs when those costs are distributed across the entire population, while concentrated benefits are locked in law. When 80% of spending is mandatory, no government can move 20% far enough to matter. What would real change require? Deep reform of the mandatory programs themselves. But that triggers the largest and most organised interest groups. Retirees vote. Union members mobilise. Small reform creates maximum disruption. What is the rational choice for any politician? Defer. The system locks further. Gridlock deepens. Given these constraints, what actually happens next? 3 scenarios are most likely to unfold over coming years. First is gradual tax increases spread across many types of taxes. Your VAT will rise slowly, carbon taxes will expand, wealth taxes will persist despite implementation challenges. Income taxes will creep higher in real terms through bracket creep. These moves avoid confronting core spending directly. They push the problem onto those with lowest incomes and smallest political voice proportionally. Is it distributionally ugly? Yes, but it is politically viable for governments seeking re-election. Second is slow growth in real benefits through stealth mechanisms. Governments will freeze pension indexation or link it to low inflation measures. They will restrict healthcare reimbursement. They will tighten eligibility for family benefits. These changes happen quietly without fanfare. They are not reversed on election day. Over 2 decades they add up, but each year the change is small enough that no election is fought on it directly. Third is continued EU tension and conflict. If your nation cannot adjust fast enough to meet Brussels' requirements, the EU will escalate pressure and criticism. What could result? Nationalist backlash. Initial moves toward reducing French EU obligations and sovereignty constraints. Future leaders might pursue this more aggressively. This could undermine European unity on fiscal rules. Notice what all 3 paths share, and what they all avoid. None confronts the core issue directly. None reshapes the mandatory spending that created the lock in the first place. None taxes high-income retirees while protecting low-wage workers earning minimum wage. None expands benefits for the young while protecting current pensioners. Instead, all 3 paths distribute pain sideways and downward. Tax increases hit the young and mobile most severely. Benefit freezes hit the future most severely. Those currently retired are largely protected by grandfather clauses. Why does this pattern emerge consistently? In French democracy, it makes sense politically. Retirees vote at higher rates than the young. They have organised interest groups. They have already collected on past promises. But this means the adjustment is delayed and deferred. Your bill is pushed forward to future generations. Is this unique to France? No. It is the universal temptation of political systems in debt. But France's depth of debt and rigidity of spending mean this temptation is stronger here. The geometric lock ensures that easy choices get made first. Hard choices get deferred. One boundary exists that matters. If your nation ever loses credibility with international lenders, the choice set collapses entirely, and you face forced adjustment. If investors begin to doubt that France will repay, they will demand higher interest rates to compensate for risk. At some point, those rates become unsustainable and unaffordable. Then the spiral begins. Higher rates trigger faster debt growth. Faster debt growth triggers worse credit ratings. Worse ratings trigger more investor selling. Selling triggers higher rates. Your country faces forced adjustment under crisis conditions. Has this happened before? Yes. Greece faced it. Ireland faced it. Portugal faced it. Spain faced it. It could happen to France. Not tomorrow, not from current conditions, but the path points in that direction historically. The longer your government defers adjustment, the more sudden it will be when forced. Is France in a credibility crisis now? No. but the structure that created the lock ensures that adjustment will be deferred until crisis makes it unavoidable. The moment of truth approaches. You might ask why this matters if you live outside France or Europe. The answer is contagion and interconnection. France is the Eurozone's second largest economy by a significant margin. If France enters a debt crisis, the entire system is stressed and destabilized. Investors lose confidence in other Euro countries. Borrowing costs rise across Europe. Growth slows across the continent. Unemployment rises in interconnected economies. And politically, European integration fractures under pressure. In a crisis, countries become nationalist. They protect themselves first. The European project, built on the assumption of shared prosperity and interdependence, splinters. Has this happened before? Yes, during 2011 to 2015, when the euro crisis unfolded. Could it happen again? Absolutely. Your fiscal lock is not just a French problem, it is a European system risk. Understanding why France cannot reform is understanding why Europe as a whole faces instability. The spreadsheet does not care about national borders. Return to where we began, March 2027. Your election is over. The winner stands before the camera. Promises are made. Reform is coming. Sacrifice is necessary. The people are ready. Now listen carefully to these words. Every new government makes them. Every election cycle repeats them. But the arithmetic does not change with elections. It does not shift with parties. 57% spending, 113% debt, 14% pensions. These numbers predate this government. They will outlast it. Change the government, change the party, change the leader. Change your mind about what is possible. The lock remains. The spreadsheet stays the same. This is not pessimism. It is geometry. And geometry, unlike politics, does not bend to will or hope. Your nation can vote left or right. The spreadsheet stays the same.